Good morning everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Morning Coffee with Cameron. In today's video, I wanted to walk you guys through my new track Icarus, which is the official demo track for Mixcraft Pro Studio 9. As you may or may not know, I also created the official demo track for Mixcraft Recording Studio 9, which is my track As Skies Grew Dark. I also posted a walkthrough of that track as well, so if you're interested, you can check that out. So the folks at Acoustica asked me to create a separate demo track for the Pro Studio edition of Mixcraft. So like I said in my other video, it was a real honor to be selected for this project, and it's super cool because I actually started producing using Mixcraft years and years ago. In this video, I'll be breaking down the track, talking about the mixing, the sound design, the inspiration, and all that good stuff. If you are a Mixcraft user, you might notice that this version I'm going to show here today has been slightly modified. I made a few slight alterations to the arrangement of the track, and I changed out a few plugins as well. This is just because I have some specific stuff I like to use on my final products. However, the version you see in Mixcraft is still an extremely accurate representation of the way the song is crafted and mixed. So the inspiration behind this track is actually pretty simple. It's not really anything too deep. Over my kind of winter break, I bought the video game Assassin's Creed Odyssey, which is a really wicked game, and I really wish I had more time to keep playing it, but I had to stop because, reality hits and I have to get back to being a functional human. So in the game, you have a bird that's Icarus, I think is the name of the bird if I remember right. So I just thought it was really cool to switch to the bird in the game and just fly around. And, not really do anything. It was just cool to kind of float and fly and explore. And, the scenery in the game is beautiful. The graphics are amazing. And I just really liked that feeling. So that's really the vibe I wanted to sum up in this track. I wanted to capture the emotional experience and kind of what it felt like to be the bird in the game and fly around with all this cool stuff. So it's, I guess, a happier track in a way, which is somewhat odd for me, but it's a bit more dreamy and kind of floaty, loose, and that's really what I wanted to create. And yeah, that's pretty much the inspiration behind the whole thing. So let's hop into Mixcraft and break the track down. Alrighty, here we are in the DAW, and I think before we begin, I will just play kind of the first segment of the track so you can get an idea of the vibe and everything, and then we will break it down. Let's go ahead and take a listen now. Okay, so that is the basic vibe and everything there is to know about the track. So I think I'm just going to break this down kind of in the order of operations that I work, because that might be helpful for those of you who are into this style. So when I start a song, the biggest thing to me is getting the atmosphere right. That is the whole point of making music for me, is capturing an emotion, a feeling, a experience that I had. Whatever that might be. In this case, it's just playing a video game. So the first thing I actually did for this track is write the piano melody, because it was already in my head. So I had kind of a loose picture of the main kind of motif that's echoed throughout the track, and then a few alterations on it. So we'll take a listen here. So that was what was in my head. That was basically the feeling right there. I don't know. It may make sense if you understand what I mean, but yeah, it was all just about getting that vibe. So if I disable the effects here, it's just a really dry piano sound. This is coming from Arturia Piano V, I believe, in this version. So nothing all that crazy. Mixing stuff was added later, but the first thing I did add was actually a reverb. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. This is Fusion Field, which is actually a pretty wicked reverb. I like this thing a lot. So this is the Mixcraft edition. I don't know much about where this came from. Mixcraft has a handful of kind of plugins from third-party places. I don't know what the full edition is, but it's got this kind of cool animated star GIF background, which I think is neat, but it's just got a really nice spacey vibe. I don't know. So this is a pretty long reverb, about 8 seconds, and once you add that in, it just really opens up that piano, I think, emotionally. I cut out the low end here about 380 hertz just to get rid of some mud. The delay is actually at 0, so I want this to kind of come in right away. I don't want to have the piano in a room. I just want the piano to be bigger, I guess is the way I would describe that. So that's a good tip as well if you like to do sounds like that, is have no pre-delay on the reverb. If you add pre-delay, it's that acoustic simulation, and I think sometimes that can mess up the vibe of a sound. So this just makes things sound huge without putting them in an exact acoustic space, if that makes sense. Beyond that, I threw a compressor on here. This is just a tone booster compressor. The tone booster plugins inside of Mixcraft are actually really wicked. I like these a lot. So this is more or less just squishing the tail a little bit so the reverb kind of expands out. It just helps give it that, still going, yeah, really long kind of squished out tail. And that was the whole beginning of the track. From there, I wanted to add in some ambiances. So that is the ambience folder here. This includes 3 different ambiances. There's a recording of, I think this is where I live now. Sounds like it. I think this was just in my backyard, or maybe I was out walking the dog. I don't know. This is the sound of a truck stop, which is up the road from me. I remember doing this recording actually, and I was sitting in my car with my field recorder, and I rolled down my window and just held my field recorder out my window, trying not to look like a total psycho. But yeah, that was a truck stop. And then I recorded some rain maybe a month ago, something like that. There was a lot of rain. And I just thought that was a nice sound bed. So once you put it all together, just gives everything a bit more vibe, makes things less boring. The rain, I cut out some low end and some high end and a little bit of mids just because this recording was very, very big. You know, there's a lot of low end and rumble and whatever because it was storming. So I just cut that out. The rest of them didn't touch. That was really the biggest part of getting everything right. Once you put that together with the piano, that really encapsulated what I wanted. So from there, it was a matter of adding a bit more ambience and space. Like I said, I really like to work getting the vibe right before all else. So at this point, I had the piano and the atmospherics going, and then I started adding in some of these pads here. This first pad, I am not totally sure what it's from. Let's take a listen. So that is a pad I made on my Novation Peak. I have that patch in there somewhere. The biggest thing I can tell you is it's some saw waves. One of them is a wavetable. So there's 3 oscillators, 2 saws, 1 wavetable. There's noise, and then there's filter FM. I think the filter FM is coming from the noise, which is what gives it that really grainy vibe. A lot of drift and stuff on it as well, just to give it that nice gooey pad. That feeds into this EQ here. Not doing all that much, just some high passing. And then just tweaking a little bit of tone here and there. That's really it. And then that goes into an equalizer as well. Once again, cutting out unnecessary low end to leave headroom, cutting out some mid mud, a little bit of resonance here around 1K, and dipping off some high end because I don't want too much high end in the track. I just want, you know, the atmosphere of the pad. I don't really want the crispies because I need to save all that for my percussion. So that was the beginning of everything. And then I started throwing in some sine pads here. So these are made with sine waves. This is the first layer. Some noise in there as well, you can hear. This is the Novation Peak as well. Nothing too crazy. Once again, EQ, cutting out unnecessary low end and some mud. That also goes into a slice EQ, which cleans out even more low end and a bit more mud here. Not sure why I used 2 EQs on that, other than I just did. I think the slice EQ was added later on, so I think I was just not happy with how it was sitting and went in one more time. Because slice EQ allows you to be really, really precise. Sine pad 2 is just another layer that comes in the second section, which is right when the drums come in. So this layers up with that first sine pad just to create some more room. So as you can hear, it's not the same notes, it's creating a harmony. So if I play these together, and it's very drifty once again, kind of chaotic, which I like. It's just a cool feeling. Just basic EQ once again. Not doing much. I try to mix pretty minimally anymore, mostly to save time, which is maybe a video I'll do at some point. Beyond that, there wasn't too much else I got started with. I then came in and did this pluck layer. So this was made... I'm maybe 50% confident in saying this is my Electron Digitone. It might be a patch on the Peak. There's definitely something FME about it. If we disable the effects, it sounds like this. So it already had a pretty big reverb and stuff on it. I just wanted more. So there's a delay. I think I just went with a preset. I don't think I changed anything. This adds some cool ping-ponging effects. There's Acoustica Pro Studio reverb, a really nice reverb inside of Mixcraft. Really, really big, but not super wet. This way I'm just adding a bit of space in the background of the sound. Then EQ here. This is one of the coolest things about Mixcraft. It's similar to Bitwig because you can add modulators. So this is just the Tone Boosters EQ, nothing too crazy, with a high cut here. Then I added an LFO. You can do that by adding a new controller up here. You can do audio rate, MIDI, or an LFO. Just a really slow sine, and then I adjusted the minimum and maximum values to get some cool filtery movements, just to add a bit of interest and variation over time. Because if things are too static, I think it's pretty noticeable, and that gets a bit boring. So with all that put together, I had a pretty good starting point for the track with all these layers. And that was the heart and soul of this track. I was very, very happy at this point. Once you bring in the atmospherics as well, you just get a really great feeling. I don't know, I just really was super, super stoked on this when I first wrote it. And I don't know what it is about the game and what inspired me and what created this mood, but I really like this uplifting, dreamy vibe, but it's also a bit mournful, I guess. It's a really cool feeling, and I was very, very pleased with myself when it came out this way, because it was just exactly what I wanted. You know, it kind of gives you that flying above the clouds and looking over the landscapes and whatever, but you know, there's also just a hint of loneliness to it. And some, you know, sweeping, mourny, sad, screamy sign pads in the background that just really kind of gave it that like eagle screeching vibe. And, you know, it just, everything came together perfectly. And I was very, very happy with that. So from there, I added in, you guessed it, another pad layer. So this is the grain pad right here. Let me unsolo all this stuff and we can take a listen to that. The grain pad was made in UVI Falcon using, I don't know what, a bunch of melodic stuff. I think it was a generative thing I made in Voltage Modular using a quantizer to a pentatonic scale. That way I could just let it run, capture it, and then put it into Falcon and stretch it out with the multi-granular oscillator into Oblivion. Actually, it's coming back a bit more here. So this is actually one layer of a note, I think across maybe a couple octaves, and then it stretched out. That way I could play chords with it to give the pad more movement. So that the pentatonic theory was incorrect. So this is what it sounds like. This is a very, very pretty pad, very airy, very spacey, but very big. If I get rid of this EQ, this pad is a nightmare. So there's a lot of low end and some very high stuff. And that EQ tames it. It gets a bit telephony, but in the context of the track, it just fills in some extra space. So this is Icarus as a whole. This is what makes up the track. From there, it was just a matter of adding drums. So at this point, this is where I was at. So the grain pad is mostly there just to add a bit of variation, indicate a new section, and then just build up a lot of energy and depth to the point where it drops out in the midsection. So the midsection is just a pad and the piano. The pluck begins fading in here, and then we go into the B section. So everything else stays the same, it's just the piano that changes. So this is kind of the second iteration of the main melody and whatnot. So that is this part. And that was the B section. There wasn't too much else that I changed. I just wanted kind of a secondary melody and maybe a turning point in the story arc of the character in this song, the character being the bird. That was really it. In terms of other instruments, there's not too much to talk about. There's a bass patch, which is just a nice modulated Reese thing. This is my patch on my Novation Peak that I use for a lot of my songs now. Nice, low, growly, rumbly bass. So the first insert on this bass here is a bus compressor. This is actually just doing some side chaining from the mod bass layer. I'm not sure why I side chain this way in Mixcraft, but I just do. So this is the makeup parameter being targeted by the mod bass. I adjusted the min and max here and attack and release to taste. This way, whenever the mod bass hits, the main bass ducks out of the way. That way I'm not getting a buildup of low rumbly grossness. That's all that one is doing. There's nothing else to it. This is the EQ on the main Reese. I'm cutting out a lot of sub information just because it's way too much in each headroom and we don't really need it. Boosting a little bit around 80 to 100 hertz. That way I just get a bit more oomph. And cutting out some mud here just for clarity's sake. Just getting rid of kind of the initial second, third order harmonic stuff. That way we just get a nice, deep, clean sound. Let's talk about the mod bass, because that's probably what everyone's more interested in. We've all made a Reese bass 10 billion times on this channel. So the mod bass. This is a bit more interesting. I believe this is just a square and a saw wave. On hearing it, I think that's exactly the case. And there's not much detuning if you listen closely. Fairly consistent. The filter is just a bandpass filter, and there's no automation or anything. I'm just doing that with the filter cutoff knob on the peak. So let's break down the bass signal chain here. So first up, we have a TB gate. This is getting rid of something. I think there's just some random noise or something in the track that I wanted to get rid of. Don't remember offhand. Maybe not. I don't know. So the fusion field, this is the reverb. Once again, about 5.5 seconds just to add a bit of space and depth. I think adding a reverb to a bass that's modulated can be really nice. Low cut, again, up relatively high. This way we're not ringing out all the low junk and screwing up our mix. So without the reverb and with it, since reverb is also a time-based effect, it also provides an interesting opportunity to accentuate the filter movements, because you're hearing reverb is just delay. So you're hearing a different snapshot in time as the filter moves, if that makes sense. So you can kind of make the bass seem more complicated than it actually is by using reverb, because it's echoing an earlier point in time. So that's just a cool thought to experiment with. Even short reverbs can provide some interesting things, as well as provide some awesome stereo width. So the parametric equalizer. This is where things got fun. Once again, I'm using LFOs. I created 2 notch filters here and then a peak. So this is just moving around, and that's what creates a lot of that extra movement. So you'll hear when I play this now, we get those really cool neuro-y, raspy movements. You could also move the reverb after the modulated EQ. Provides a just different effect. If you have Mixcraft, you can experiment with that and see what you think. Finally, there's a bus compressor here. This is just squeezing the sound down. Since this is a heavily modulated sound, there's a lot of movement, and I want this to be very solid because it's, a big, mean bass layer. So that's pretty much it. And then, as you hear, when I play both these bass layers together, the main bass will duck out of the way of the modulated bass. Just so we get a lot more clarity. That's the entire instrument section. There's nothing else to know about, really. Let's move on to drums. Okay, so within the drum folder here, there's folders and subfolders and a lot of things happening. So it's actually not all that complicated, but I'll break it down kind of one segment at a time. So when I first start out, I like to just work with kick and snare, and then a couple of hats to create the initial groove. So I started out with just a kick and 1 rim shot. These are labeled as hats. I don't know why. I think I changed around the order of tracks or something and just forgot to rename them because it doesn't really matter. So we have the snare and kick here. That was really the initial groove. Then from there, I added in a couple of hat layers. So this is hats from my Mori sample pack. A lot of these drums are from my Mori sample pack. In case you're curious, you can pick that up on my website if you like these types of sounds. That created the initial groove. It's pretty straightforward. If we mute this first or second layer, you'll hear that it's just a very standard drum groove. Not anything too complicated. And then I came in with a second hat layer to add some kind of offbeat accents just to give a bit more interest. To get the hats nice and crispy, I have one of my favorite EQs on earth, the PSP E27 SE. I'm just doing the 28K switch and cutting out a little bit of low end because there was like some weird rumble, I think, in one of the samples. And that's it. That's really the initial drum groove. From there, I layered up the snare a bit, so there's a second snare layer here. Just makes it a bit thicker. It's also slightly offset. That way, just every hit is a bit different. So this is actually several different samples, if I remember right. But just offsetting a layer to the snare can be really nice. There's a texture layer here. That way we get a nice kind of pre-shift loose snare, and then a second layer of texture here. Like most good drums in life, this is just Foley stuff that's also, I think, all in the Mori pack. It should all be. Beyond that, I just kind of started filling out the percussion layers on top of it because I was happy with that groove. I just needed a bit more stuff going on. That way I could provide variation by subtraction. So the main thing is the roller hats layer here. This has a transient vitalizer on it. I don't know what this plugin is like doing exactly, but it just adds a cool kind of crispy thing on top of it. It is only 32-bit, so you could probably find that for free, but it might not work. Then that goes into this crazy EQ. If you asked me why I did this, I don't know. I just wanted to do it. I remember just kind of thinking I could create like a phaser flanger effect if I just did a bunch of notches. So did a bunch of notches, 2 LFOs here, and just moving these by different amounts. That's pretty much the entire explanation. Just creates a really fun effect. Without it, things were just a bit plain, so I did this just to create some modulation, as well as illustrate the power of the modulation stuff inside of Mixcraft. That goes into Dubmaster Liquid Delay, copied a preset from one of the other tracks. It was just the Bubbles one, just a nice delay preset. That goes into a Slice EQ. This is carving out just some resonances and boosting a little bit of 7K just for, I guess, a bit of air and crispiness. Below that is the final layer of hats and stuff. This is the liquid hats. We'll go ahead and mute the rest of this too. These are a bit hard to hear. So this is the liquid hats. This was added in kind of as a last layer just for some extra interest overall. Not much to talk about. This is just some Meridian hats. And then I added a panning effect with an LFO just to add a bit of stereo movement and, again, change over time just for more interest. One thing of note is that the LFOs are not tied to a grid value, and that's something important, just so it's different. You know, it's not the same modulation every bar. It's just going to be unique because it's just an LFO drifting as it is. It's not resetting. It's not being triggered by anything. Really great tip just to add movement is use LFOs that are not synced. It's a really cool way to get some extra variation without a lot of effort, which I'm all about doing things the fastest and most efficient way possible. I suppose the last thing of note in the drums here would be the cymbals and stuff. This is not really anything crazy. Some cymbals from Mori, purple noise, which is a color of noise that just adds that nice air burst, and then another cymbal here from Mori. This creates a really cool, big impact hit. This goes into a fusion field here. This is a big reverb, 10 seconds. Not much else to note. Pretty wet. That's about it. That goes into another reverb, which is also like 10 seconds and really, really wet. This just makes this a huge, huge sound. That goes into a parametric EQ here, cutting out low end and shaving off some high stuff just so it's not super brittle and annoying. I just wanted to soften that up a bit. Without the effects, it's still a pretty big sound. But here it's very bright and brittle, and it's also not that big, and we want that huge, larger than life thing. So stacking reverbs and whatnot can be a great way to achieve that. I don't know if there's much else to talk about with these other than one thing to try is also come in and fade off the initial transient of a cymbal, and that's a good way just to add a bit of space rather than an impact. And that's it really for the drums and instruments. It's a pretty straightforward track, I think, just a lot of small moving parts. Let's talk about bus processing. On the instruments here, there's two different TB bus compressors. This isn't actually compressing. This is side chaining. So I'm targeting makeup. This is the snare. This is the kick. That way the instrumental ducks out of the way of the drums. Standard stuff you should probably know how to do. Beyond that, the drum bus has a few things of interest on it. There's a PSP bus presser, which is a really, really, really nice gluey compressor. So 50 millisecond attack to make sure the transients cut through, ratio of 2.5 to 1, release time to taste, and just ducking off like maybe 2.5 dB. I don't want to do much. I just want to squeeze things together. Makeup gain like 2 dB just to compensate. That goes into Mix Saturator, and this is a magical plugin for drums. If you don't own the PSP Mix Pack, you should pause this now and go buy it. This is one of my secret weapon plugins. Mix Saturator is a saturator. Obviously, it's got different modes, but the real great thing about it is this low and high control set. So the low end can lift up low stuff. It's just a low enhancer, and then the high end can soften things up. In this case, I already manually softened things up, but the low end of everything wasn't really hitting the way I wanted it to. So let's compare before and after. Bring it in. And you hear that kick just jumps out a little bit more. And this is an amazing plugin for sound design and for mixing. If you don't own the Mix Pack, go buy it. Okay, moving on. This is the final thing. In hindsight, this was a stupid way to do this. I'm not sure why I thought I had to do it this way, but whatever. This is using kilohertz slice EQ as a filter. I have a macro for low pass and a macro for high pass. I, again, am not certain why I did it this way. I could have just used a slice EQ and then went in and used the filter cutoff. I don't know. Don't have an explanation for everything. So that is this automation stuff here. When you hear the drums get filtery, this is just to build some anticipation, energy, and keep things going, because as a whole, this genre and style is somewhat repetitive, and there's a lot of space and depth and energy and things. So using filter sweeps on drums and instrument buses especially can help us as an arrangement tool, as a mixing tool, and just as a tool of good practice in life. It's a good way to build up and release, and it's a good way to indicate to the listener, okay, end of segment, let's move forward. Just a very handy thing to do if you don't know about doing that type of stuff. This, in case you're curious, is sweeping over the course of a bar, and it's ducking in right before it comes back in on the downbeat. I believe that's a 16th note before. So another tip there, don't do a hard filter drop. It will more often than not sound weird. Okay, one other thing of note before we get into the mastering and stuff is the noise reference and send tracks here. So the send track is Denise Perfect Room. If we open up the mixer here, there's not a whole lot being sent to it. It's just the drum stuff, really. I think I only sent the snare to it, actually. So Perfect Room, I did a whole video about if you don't own that plugin, you need to go buy it. It is one of the best reverbs I've ever heard. And for room reverb, I will say it is the best room reverb I have ever heard. Uses some kind of special hoodoo, great sounding reverb to make things just a bit livelier. Okay, this is it. It's like pretty straightforward. 22 millisecond delay, relatively long tail, about 1.5 seconds. High pass and low pass to taste, just to filter things out. It's on the flat mode. Typically, I like this on dark. And if I play the drums and mute this, you'll hear it just kind of loses a bit of life, I guess. I'm going to bring in the drum bus, actually, as well. Just a little bit, so you can get a taste of what this can add. So we'll just very faintly bring that in, and I'm going to mute this send. By no means a bad drum mix. Just maybe a bit meh. Let's bring in Perfect Room. Just adds a bit of life, a bit of depth in a very subtle way. And that's what I love about that reverb. It's a great way just to enhance the stereo image of things. It's a great way to enhance your drums as a whole. Okay, pink noise. That's how I mix pretty much everything. This is M Noise Generator from Melda Productions. Pink noise going out at minus 3 dB. I think I measured this with an RMS meter on the master bus just to set the level to like maybe minus 12 RMS. Then I mix with pink noise. If you would like to see a video about why and how I mix with pink noise, let me know in the comments. I'd be happy to make a video on it. It's way too deep of a subject to go into here. Okay, mastering. Mastering is pretty straightforward. This is triple meter in RMS, so yeah, I did minus, I don't know what in RMS, looks like minus 14 is what I was going for with the pink noise reference, in case you're curious and know how to mix with pink noise. So triple meter doesn't actually do anything. The first thing in the mastering chain is Vintage Warmer 2, again, another plugin from PSP AudioWare that if you do not own, you need to pause this video and go buy it. Fat mode, driving up a bit. Knee, I'm aiming for about 1 dB in the meter. If that, really. Very subtle. Didn't adjust anything here. We could maybe boost the low and high just a tad. Let's try that out. Nah, doesn't really add much. So just a great plugin for mastering, for buses, for all that stuff. If I disable this, you'll hear it loses a lot of life. Just adds a really lovely bit of goo to the whole thing. The mastering EQ is Noble Q here. This isn't really like a mastering EQ, it's just a really great sounding EQ. This is boosting a little bit at 15K, boosting a little bit around 60 Hertz, attenuating a little bit around 60 Hertz. Valve with the little bias dial up 1 notch. That's kind of my typical mastering trick. I really like this EQ on masters. Don't at me, bro. I just think it's a great EQ to add some character. I really love the PSP plugins, as I'm sure you know. I really love how they can just add color by just running sound into them. So I'm not really EQing all that much. I'm mostly using the Noble Q for the color it imparts. I'll go ahead and disable that, and let's take a listen. And bring it in. It might be subtle, but I hope you can hear the difference that adds. It's a very clean and lovely low-end weight booster, and it softens up the highs while simultaneously lifting them just a bit. It just pulls that blanket off the mix, and that's what I really love about this EQ on a master. Next up in the chain here, Master Comp. This is just a phenomenally great master compressor. This is really precise. There's like a whole bunch of stuff behind this that makes it as good as it is. Just gluing things together. I could have used the PSP bus presser, but usually I like Master Comp. This is without it. Bring it in. So just using this for a bit of glue, also a slight level lift, because I don't like to drive my limiters. I like to instead lift the level using things earlier in the mastering chain. The mode is on soft, it's on RMS, and it's on fat. Those are the only things to note there, aiming for 2.5 dB of gain reduction. Finally, the greatest thing on earth, PSP Xenon. This is an amazing, amazing, amazing limiter that is insanely super precise and stuff. Oversampling is on, that way I get true peak limiting. I have it set to -1, which is just kind of the standard for everything. So it's just going to stop at -1 dB. And that's more an LUFS thing than anything. Release was just time to taste and driven up 9.5 dB, but you'll see I'm not touching the meter much in the attenuation bar. So I'm not really driving the limiter so much as I am using it to lift the level to be acceptable. Without the limiter, as you can hear, it lifts it up in a very transparent way. It's imperceptible to my ear, at least. It's a really fantastic limiter all around. I can't say enough good things about it. That's it. Yeah, that is Icarus. There's not anything else I can think of that's worth noting. It's a cool track. I was very, very happy with it. I really like the vibe. I really like the drums. I really was happy with the mix. I was just really very pleased with this song all around, and I hope you guys enjoy it as well. And that's pretty much everything there is to know behind the tracks. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you learned something. Big shout out again over to the fine folks at Acoustica for selecting me to do this project. Like I said before, it was just a really cool experience overall, and I was really, really excited to have this opportunity, and I'm also really happy with how these two tracks turned out. If you want to check out the full track, you can find it here on the channel, you can find it on my SoundCloud, you can find it on Spotify or whatever. And yeah, so that's it for this video. Thanks for watching, and I will see you guys again soon.